Akali R cooldown increased early, R1 stun removed, R2 base maximum damage decreased, R perfect execution. Akali no longer stuns her enemies for 0.5 seconds. R2 maximum damage is down by quite a lot, actually. That is a massive gut, which is really surprising. Cooldown is also up by 40 seconds at rank 1. Holy crap. So the one of the first thoughts is that the lesser common thing that'll happen here is Akali's ability to cancel channels and also cancel, obviously, teleport or something of that nature using her R1. The loss of all of this damage makes it a lot harder for her to threaten anything at level 6. But ultimately, if you get out of the laning phase and you're not picking Akali just for any sort of early game shenanigans, which most teams don't even really pick Akali for anyway, she usually doesn't have kill opportunity unless opponents really messed up. And so the loss of the damage on the rank 1 ultimate isn't that problematic because Akali isn't really team fighting until later stages anyway, in which case her damage is totally fine. I mean, missing 30 damage at rank 2, it doesn't really matter because Akali's going to overkill most of the targets, and for the targets that she's going in on and that she's not intending to overkill, usually there's some slippery nature about it where she's just trying to soften up things and play around her shroud and whatnot. So Akali's not going to be gutted by this change, but it is something that can definitely be felt, especially in high-end solo queue where solo kills are going to exist much more often with the rank 1W. So it's not the end of the world.
Next up is Akali. Akali is another huge pro play champion that sadly has a kind of meager solo queue win rate. And so what the designers are really trying to do is find ways to chip power off Akali while still keeping her skill expressive because you want her to feel good to play. But trying to find ways to drop super high end like challenger and pro play and not hurt plat and lower. That kind of stuff. So R1 no longer stuns, and R's execute damage is lower, and R's cooldown is longer. Okay, so the no longer stun basically makes R flash less important. It also means your E is far less reliable. One of the big things that happens with Akali is that she hits you with R1. By hitting R1, E1 is guaranteed. Now you can no longer flash or run or anything because E2 is guaranteed to follow, and then R2 will kill you. Essentially, if R1 lands, you're already dead. You just haven't caught up yet. That's a Shen quote, but it works here also. So this is, I would say, deceptively a very big deal. It certainly is a stun. That matters. 0.5 seconds is not huge, but it exists. But it's the guaranteed E that's the really big deal, in my opinion. It also means she no longer has hard CC on the kit, so she can't stop teleports or any random channels. That can also be a really big deal for champion matchups. And champion matchups are something that really often helps pro play because they say, we can just play Malzahar in an Akali game, and don't worry, she can't stop the ulti. That can sometimes be really relevant as well. So I think this actually is pretty meaningful. Now, the second one is the R damage. It is down by 60, 30, and 0. The R cooldown is up by 30, 20, and 0. No, sorry, 60, 40, 20, and 0. My brain just like exploded for a second. So let's talk about those numbers right here. Here's the R2 damage. Now, I want to point out this is not every R2, all right? Sometimes there's D2. No, but the real point is this is only the maximum execute damage, which means a full health target is taking full damage regardless. It's 100% of the same damage as the previous patch. If they're at, let's say, 2/3, you're only doing about half of this. This is not as big of a nerf as it looks like on paper. Like, I think the R1 nerf is quite substantial. The R2 nerf is not quite as big as you might think. Also worth pointing out, by the way, that it still has the 0.9 AP ratio attached to it, so there is a lot of scaling damage that reinforces this. Also keeps her late game intact. Her early game is weaker. That's another interesting sort of shape to the champion. Excuse me, sorry. And then the cooldown being up by 40, 20, 0 is pretty meaningful as well. So this is a really big deal because this hurts her early safety a lot. Her early dueling is down. 60 damage here is quite meaningful. But also 40 seconds on the ultimate means she is really, really, really far more gankable. Far more gankable. And that's going to be a big deal. So Akali is going to lose a lot of pro presence overall.
Akali, R cooldown increased early, R1 stun removed, R2 base maximum damage decreased early. Similar to Aatrox, we're focusing our changes on Akali's pro presence, specifically in limiting her power before her level 11 spike. We're removing the stun on her R1 to increase counterplay and open up the number of champions that can play against her. Ultimately, we think it's a good change for her in the long term. So she no longer gets mini stun, and her damage is a little nerfed in level 6. And the cooldown on her ult is nerfed in level 6 and 11. Okay, so I actually think the biggest problems with Akali is her stealth. Like, I'm sure this ult nerf is going to help, but it's the stealth aspect of Akali that makes her so bullshit in teamfights and so bullshit to dive against. And it allows her to really buy a lot of time. And like, buying time is something incredibly valuable in pro play, while it's not very valuable in solo queue. Akali putting down her Shroud in a team fight, top up an AD carry, can zone out the AD carry for such a long period. And I'm surprised Riot doesn't really recognize like how much utility W is able to provide. So, I mean, nerf to Akali is good. One thing that actually is hilarious about this is a mini buff to Akali in a certain way, because if she no longer stuns her enemies, right? Akali's biggest counter pick right now is Sylas. And a lot of the Sylases in Europe run Aftershock. When you steal Akali's ult and you miss your E, you can get your Aftershock by using Akali ult and getting the mini stun. Now that she doesn't mini stun anymore, the Sylases getting picked against Akali actually is a pretty big hit. So maybe people will adapt and run Electrocute, or they'll just run different masteries. But it's funny in a way, by removing the mini stun, it's actually a buff to her in her most common matchup in Sylas.